All righty. That's very loud. So welcome to our Writers Wednesday. We have Samuel Ligon with us tonight. Samuel Ligon's most recent novel, Miller Kane, A True and Exact History, was serialized for a year in Spokane's weekly newspaper, The Inlander, as well as on Spokane Public Radio. The author of 4 previous books of fiction, including Wonderland and Safe in Heaven Dead, Ligon is also co-editor with Kate Lebo of Pie and Whiskey, Writers Under the Influence of Butter and Booze. His stories and essays have appeared in the Georgia Review, New England Review, the Gettysburg Review, and elsewhere. He teaches at Eastern Washington University in Spokane and serves as EWU's faculty legislative liaison in Olympia. When Sam was the artistic director of the Port Townsend Writers Conference, he hosted the readings every night. And the way he brought everybody on was this. He goes, here comes Sam Ligon, the greatest living writer in the history of the world.
Thanks, y'all. Yeah, you kind of going to yell.
Right.
Okay. Hi. How's that? Is that, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. I'm sure it's good.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Hi. I'm gonna, like Rob, I've been a fiction writer for most of my career, but in the last few years I've started writing nonfiction. And I don't know why exactly, but we'll probably end up talking about that a little bit. It's weird, it's interesting. It's cool to not know what you're doing, to be in a zone of really not understanding exactly what you're doing and breaking new rules and not being aware of it. So I'm going to read an essay. And it's, I know some of you might have read Gun School. I was going to read that, but I'm not going to read it because you might have read it already. So it's good, but it's in that same vein. This one's about gentrification. It's local to the West a little bit. So I'm going to tell you a couple things about the West that you might not know. Do you know the restaurant, the French Laundry?
Yes.
Okay, so you tell us about it.
I don't know much about it. I was talking about it a few days ago with someone, so it's funny, but it's in Sonoma County, right? Somewhere around there.
So it's wine country.
There's a book that was pretty famous.
What is it? Is that the chef?
Without Chez Panisse, though.
No, that is Chez Panisse. You're right. No, I think that is Chez Panisse. I don't know. I don't know. You're going to see how much I don't know. But so when the French Laundry is a snotty restaurant in Sonoma County in wine country between like Santa Rosa straight west, San Francisco's southwest. And so it's just the French Laundry. Do you know who Narcissa Whitman is?
Nobody knows Narcissa.
I know they don't.
No.
So Narcissa Whitman was allegedly the first white woman to cross the Rockies. Right. So with her husband, Marcus, who was a doctor, this is in like 1836, they were missionaries and they were going into Oregon Territory to save the benighted heathen. Okay, so there was a big deal that she was the first white woman to cross the mountains. And when we say the first white woman, that excludes anyone who had any French blood. A lot of this history is just complete bullshit, you find out as you go through it. But in the West, Narcissa Whitman had a role of being this pioneer, and the significance of the woman crossing the Rockies was some scholars talk about it as the beginning of the domestication of the West. Once a woman could live in the West, it was, even though she absolutely hated it, she was horrible to the people. They hated her and ultimately killed the hell out of her and her husband. She remained a hero for a number of years. And only recently, people have been like, maybe she wasn't that good. Maybe she was these people weren't really that good. But there's a Saudi university named after them called Whitman College, which maybe you've heard of, but maybe you've not. It would be kind of like, what's a good snotty small school? Bard.
Yeah.
Right. Or do you know Reed in Portland? Yeah. It's kind of like Reed, right? Rich, snotty, but this happens to be named after pioneer missionaries. So that's Narcissa Whitman. There's a thing in Spokane called Hoop Fest. And what Hoop Fest is the largest outdoor 3-on-3 basketball tournament in the world. Okay. Largest 3-on-3 outdoor basketball tournament in the world. All of downtown is turned into basketball courts. People play basketball. Who cares? Nobody outside of Spokane. But I'm going to mention, I get into a little bit of trouble with nonfiction in that I make stuff up in it. And this is what I mean about being, feeling free to break rules in nonfiction. So, but I tend to, a lot of the nonfiction I write goes into newspapers. So the editors don't understand this concept at all. And I don't tell them. Yeah, I tend not to tell, but I try to make it as ridiculous as possible. Bill, I'm like, is that really true? And I'm like, no. Did I not make that? So like, there's a line in here about Bing Crosby is from Spokane. And I have this line here about Bing Crosby getting drunk and demanding that Spokane changes its name to Bingtown. And so I'm like, that's obviously false, right? But he's like, is that true? And I'm like, no, we don't need to. So anyway, my point being, sometimes I'm lying in my nonfiction, but I think you should be able to tell. Okay. And it's really memoir, so it's all lies anyway, right? The personal essay. Okay, so it's called Recolonizing Spokane. Why do they keep coming is my first question, followed by, and when are they going to leave? I know the answer is never or only when they die, but I keep thinking they might find another place to go, Butte, say, or France, or some other undiscovered paradise where they could spread their money like manure in fields waiting to be made fertile. All these mid-career consultants, all these artisanal mayonnaise makers rising up and away like a plague of locusts. Rob came up with artisanal mayonnaise makers. There didn't used to be traffic here, not really. There didn't used to be unremarkable 3-bedroom houses selling for $500,000 cash either, or so many newly arrived Californians or Texans or Coloradans. The exodus used to be toward Portland and Seattle, not away from them toward Spokane. It's surely because of the pandemic and the housing crisis and even worse, traffic and congestion and climate change and fear and earthquakes and plagues being left behind that all these people who are never going to leave keep coming here. And because of the pre-war housing stock and an intact downtown, all kinds of potential, what might feel like a blank canvas, and also the food and culture that are already here and the food and culture that are coming. And because it's relatively affordable and kind of cool. And because it's not Seattle or Portland or San Diego or San Bernardino, maybe it's a little like Lisbon or London of the inland Northwest, but not really. It's just that nothing's been torn down here in so many years. And it's never really been cool. That's what's been so good about it. But now I can't even afford my own neighborhood, which is to say I would not be able to buy a house here today. I'm lucky we bought 7 years ago. All the people moving into our neighborhood now are from somewhere else. My wife, Kate, and I met this dude last summer who people said we should meet, a jam maker, a cheese smoker from Santa Barbara, Napa before that, the rich places. He'd been a private chef and a life coach and some kind of spiritual/food entrepreneur. Perhaps you've heard of the French Laundry. He practically invented it. We were at a party outside, standing around with drinks in our hands. I don't think we have any French laundries here, I said. Do we, babe? Kate shook her head. No, it's a restaurant, the jam maker said. I think we only have regular laundries here, I said. And Kate said, no, I've heard of that place. It's in Fresno or Bakersfield, one of the dusty places with lots of country music. Kate writes cookbooks and other food stuff, so she couldn't play as dumb as I could. Plus, it comes more naturally to me. The jam maker nodded, looking off into the middle distance. Maybe I don't really know what a laundry is, I said, though I do know what a laundromat is. This place isn't really a laundry or a laundromat, Kate said. It's more like fine dining, but they do your laundry while you eat. That's kind of cool, I said. Anyway, the jam maker said, and he named a few other places and people he knew that we had surely heard of, fabulous people and places. I couldn't say anything stupid enough to make him stop. And he never asked us a single question about ourselves, already as bored with us as Narcissa Whitman became with the people who would one day kill her and her missionary husband. We finally ditched him and hoped we'd never see him again. But he might be everywhere. And we might be him a little too, maybe more than a little. I like to believe it was different when I was the interloper, even though I know it wasn't. Like Tolstoy said, all happy colonists are the same. Still, there were fewer of us back then discovering Spokane, and in some ways there was less to discover. But even in 2004, the gentrification had begun, though it was slower and harder to see, except for the recently restored Davenport Hotel, a building worth mentioning because it was kind of a castle and a great place to have a drink, and the ceiling of the lobby looked like the ceiling of the Palmer House lobby in Chicago. When I visited Spokane for the first time, I talked to a guy in a bar after my interview. It was the Blue Spark. And you could still smoke cigarettes inside, and we all were. Nobody was staring into phone screens. This was when strangers sometimes talked to each other in bars, and we did that, my stool neighbor determining that I was visiting and asking me what I thought of the town. Seems pretty cool, I said, but it also seems to be dying. I'd seen the empty storefronts, the empty sidewalks, the mediocre corporate restaurants. The night before at the Ridpath Hotel, the guy at the front desk told me the best dinner in town was probably at Red Robin. The Zuna existed then, and so did Luna, but he didn't mention those. And because I didn't see the food and culture right away, I thought maybe there wasn't much. Just like the recent colonists can't possibly know what's here. All I'd seen were empty storefronts and sidewalks. Oh no, the dude beside me said, no. Spokane died years ago. It's actually coming back. And he was right, it was coming back. Though I didn't know what it was coming back from or where it was going. I didn't know about Spokane before 2004, though I've heard lots of stories since then about Expo 74 and Evel Knievel selling Coke in bars and the neo-Nazis over in Hayden Lake and the thrill rides at Nat Park and Vachel Lindsay hosting orgies at the Davenport and Elvis Presley playing Memorial Stadium before it was Joe Albee Stadium and the great Ali Frazier fights at the arena, launching Fist Fest, the precursor to Hoop Fest, when hundreds of boxing rings crowded downtown streets for weeks in June, and we all punched each other senseless. This was at the editor. I was like, did that happen? I was like, dude, do you think was there ever a Frazier Ali fight in Spokane? No, it didn't happen. There was no Fist Fest. And so then I added, and all those times Bing Crosby got wasted and demanded the city change its name to Bingtown. Those were the glory years. And then the editor made me add this line, if they ever really happened. And while the comeback might not involve those things exactly, it does involve growth and vitality and not dying. Most of my friends here are like me and the newest colonists in that we're all from somewhere else. But some of my friends are from here, born and raised, the offspring of earlier colonists. Yes, their parents or grandparents came from somewhere else, but this is where they're from. They remember when Tom Foley was Speaker of the House and Kaiser Aluminum employed thousands of steel workers. They don't complain about the new colonists the way I do. And before the new colonists came, as the city was becoming vital, my friends and I were happy when interesting restaurants opened, when Perry Street gentrified, and then Maine, and then Monroe. We thought new blood would be good for our city, new people opening new businesses, and it was good, mostly. Back then, more than 5 years ago, you could still buy a house here for $200 grand. You could still rent an apartment for $400 a month. And the food kept getting better, and more people were on the streets at night. Of course, there were still plenty of tweakers. At 79 cents and change was stolen from your car every half year or so, along with a pair of old prescription glasses for night driving. And there was homelessness like there was all over the West, though not nearly as much as today. None of that was part of any kind of charm, but it was part of the town. And then somehow everything changed gradually. And then suddenly the way Mike Campbell went bankrupt and the sun also rises. Except Spokane isn't bankrupt, not fiscally or spiritually or emotionally. It's just that a bunch of rich people from somewhere else all showed up here at once. And a lot of them might only be house rich, the way some of us would be if we sold our suddenly expensive as hell houses and moved to Butte with a whole lot of cash. My mom has always complained about Californians, particularly Californians moving into Oregon, even though her sister lived in San Jose for 50 years and my mom lived east of the Rockies for almost all of her life. But they grew up in Oregon, in the superintendent's house at the Multnomah County Poor Farm, now a destination resort called Edgefield, 15 miles east of Portland. What happened to the Davenport Hotel happened to the Poor Farm too. Though the Davenport wasn't repurposed, it remains a luxury hotel. And now so too is the Multnomah County Poor Farm, beautifully restored, rehabilitated, and renamed Edgefield, a resort you can visit to drink wine or whiskey or beer made on site, where you can listen to music and look at a weird statue of Jerry Garcia and cool paintings in the hallways of the poor people who used to live here. If you don't spend quite enough money on your accommodations, you'll have to share a bathroom down the hall, almost as if you were a little poor yourself. You can also, quote, consider the extensive artwork that tells the story of this magical place and pick up a souvenir in the beautifully curated gift shop. I remember going there as a kid, by which time the poor farm had become a county nursing home with an external building repurposed as the Edgefield Lodge for emotionally disturbed children. It was still full of poor people and smelled like disinfectant and hospital soup. I don't remember any Californians there, but I was very young. And even though I'd been raised on the idea that Californians were colonists, I never really believed it, though that sentiment still exists all over the West today. It comes from people with money moving into places with less money and making those places unaffordable. When Wayne Ritchie ran for mayor of Boise in 2019, his entire platform was to stop the California invasion. Wayne lost that election in a landslide. I don't think you can stop the invasion, the colonizing, the gentrification, any more than the Cayuse, that's the tribe that the Whitmans were trying to save, could stop the wave of Americans on the Oregon Trail. The region's native population has known all about displacement since shortly after the arrival of the Whitmans in 1836, and all the other missionaries and fur traders and gold diggers who came before and after them. The wave apparently unstoppable, promise after promise broken behind it. And of course, gentrification is not genocide. I don't even know that stopping it would be good. Would we prefer decay, inertia? Is stasis even possible? We would certainly prefer that people could afford housing again, something that would involve, at least in part, building a whole lot of houses and apartments and driving property values down, something we don't seem willing or able to do. Maybe such a strategy would only attract more colonists. Maybe such a strategy is easier proposed and executed, like stopping a virus, though doing nothing, as we seem to be doing, seems worse. I didn't understand gentrification until it came to Spokane in full force. My house in suburban New York appreciated 200% in value in 7 years, just like my house in Spokane. I spent most of that money writing for 2 years in Wisconsin, an incredible opportunity, an incredible windfall, 1,000 miles from the New York gentrification and smack in the middle of the Madison version. I knew gentrification involved relatively rich people moving in, bringing rich people stores and rich people food and culture, and not really realizing what they were papering over. But until it came to Spokane, I didn't understand how disruptive it could be, even knowing how it always displaces people and culture, how it always breeds some degree of resentment and pain. And while it's not the only driver of homelessness in Spokane, it's a significant factor. All places change, though, becoming better or worse or just different. They grow, they stagnate, they decay. Sometimes they come back. Some of my ancestors were colonists in Virginia, arriving early in the 17th century. So you can blame me for pretty much everything there. But once a colonist has been somewhere for 10 or 400 years, displacing people wittingly or not along the way, do they start to belong to that place? Maybe 6 years ago, I got into a ridiculous conflict with another driver, both of us aiming for the same parking spot downtown. I thought I was there first. So did he. His car was trashed. He might have lived in it. He was more aggressive than I was and got the spot. I flipped him off and he jumped out of his car and yelled at me to go back to Seattle. Maybe he saw the colonist in me. Or maybe it was just a lucky guess, even though I'm not from Seattle. In fact, I think of myself as from Spokane, though I'm not really from anywhere. But this place does feel like home to me, as it will to more recent colonists someday, as it probably already does. The displacement and transformation we're seeing in Spokane isn't unique. Down the road and over the Idaho border, Christ Church is colonizing Moscow, like 7 Mayflowers full of drunken Englishmen. They even have a slogan, all of Christ, for all of life, for all of Moscow. Kate and I were down there a few months ago, and let me tell you, they do mean all of Moscow. This is where University of Idaho is. The groomed young students of Christ Church's higher education arm, New St. Andrew's College, graduating leaders who shape culture living faithfully under the lordship of Jesus Christ, in their Sunday dresses and ties had colonized blocks of downtown, politely studying at outdoor tables on Main Street in front of the New St. Andrew's bookstore / coffee shop, which used to be a good restaurant. Nothing wrong with that, except that the good restaurant is gone. And home prices have gone through the roof, as they have in so many places. And the church seems more than a little aggressive, preaching that wives need to be led with a firm hand, that men conquer and women surrender, that we are not yet in a hot civil war with shooting and all, but we are in a cold civil war. At least our colonists in Spokane aren't trying to establish a theocracy, even if they are opening French laundries everywhere. So yes, things could be worse. The glass might be 3/4 empty, and as Mao said, it's always darkest just before it's totally black. But at least Zillow's saying my house has lost 10% of its value in the last 6 months, meaning I might be able to afford my neighborhood again someday. In the meantime, Butte's over there just waiting. Everyone says it's going to be the next big Bozeman, where an unremarkable starter home goes for $800,000. We might have missed our chances in Jackson Hole and Aspen and Bozeman and Seattle and Boise, and now for some of us, even in Spokane, which is a lot like Jackson Hole and Aspen, though also somewhat different. But that doesn't mean we have to miss out on Butte, where the housing is cheap and the living is easy, and the whole darn place is just lying there, waiting for colonists like us to come along and make the fallow fields fertile again. Thanks. Can I go over here? Oh my God.
So now we wait for Elaine to come from the other room. Adjust the camera. Yeah, we do, because it's for the satellite audience all over the world. Thank you, Elaine. So that was lovely. Your first piece of fiction was published in the Quarterly in the early 40s. When was that exactly? Was that the 80s?
It was the 80s.
Okay.
It was 88.
88. So you published your first piece of fiction in the Quarterly, famously run by Gordon Lish in 1988. And the arc of your career, you wrote fiction primarily until very recently.
Like 5 years ago.
And when you turned to nonfiction. So I'm curious as to the evolution of that, you know, writing fiction for as long as you did. And we're going to circle back to the fiction, of course. And now you're finding nonfiction. How did you come to this change of genre, and what is it doing for you that perhaps fiction didn't?
So this editor, my wife and I started this event in Spokane called Pie and Whiskey. And it's an event that we make a whole lot of pie and pour 2 cases of whiskey for people who are there. So about 300 to 400 people come to this event. We serve them all. We have readers that can really hold a crowd that is getting drunk and eating a lot. It's really, really fun. And we didn't know it was going to take off and be this thing, but it was, and it was cool. And it became really super idiotic. In that what I wrote became really idiotic. So like I wrote a piece about a woman who had twin children, but her breasts gave butter and whiskey. One side was butter and one side was whiskey. And the children grew up and wouldn't stop feeding. And it became this just idiotic stuff like this, right? Because you're reading for 3 minutes. Anyway, the editor of the weekly newspaper came up to me and goes, "Hey man, why don't you write for me?" And he goes, "I'll pay you." I was like, "How much?" He was like, like $300. Can you do it every week? I was like, "No, I don't think I can do it every week." He goes, what do you want? He goes, "Just do whatever you want." So I was like, "Okay." I said, "I don't think I can." So I went back and thought about it. I was like, maybe I can write something. He's like, "Just write about boobs." I was like, "That's no. I don't want. That sounds dumb, but I'll try to." So I started writing. I went and made whiskey with a guy for a day. The guy who donates the whiskey to Pine Whiskey. It was really cool. So I wrote about that. And then I just started writing really weird stuff. And I was like, "Can I write whatever I want?" He's like, "Yeah." So I did. So that's how I started to learn how to write nonfiction. And what I liked about it, what I said at the beginning, I didn't know, some of my nonfiction colleagues have a lot of rules about nonfiction, like we do maybe in fiction, that I wasn't paying attention to. So you might hear the rule like, "Oh yeah, you can't reproduce dialogue in nonfiction." And I was like, "Well, what if I make it up?" And they're like, "You can't make it up." I was like, "Well, I'm just making up stuff." So it was really super liberating for me to write the nonfiction. And there is a difference. I mean, I'm not really just making it up. Dybeck talked about memoir, and he stole this line from Mary Carr, I think, and when you write, somebody said, "What's the difference when you write fiction compared to nonfiction?" He said, in nonfiction, my allegiance is to memory. In fiction, it's to imagination to the story. And I don't, that's cute and clever. So but I think there is a difference. So I am trying to get to stuff that did happen in nonfiction. So it does feel different to me. And it just feels like you get to meaning in a completely different way. So it was liberating after so many years writing fiction to work in a different form. I couldn't do poetry. So this is what I could do. And it was really cool. And the main thing was I had somebody saying, give me stuff. I had an editor say, just give me stuff and I'll pay you. It's like, great. You know, I will absolutely give you stuff. And the reception was good. People in town were into it and writing to me. It was just really fun. So I did that for a while and then I just kept doing it. And so now, and I'm back to it now and trying to learn how to do it better. And you know, Rob's done it in the last 5 years, right? And I think had a similar experience, the liberation.
Mm-hmm. It is liberating and it's fun to exercise those different muscles. And so right now, you know, we in our classes, we talk about craft and we talk about all the elements that we want, you know, risking and everything we need to do in a piece of fiction or a piece of nonfiction, whatever. And so I'm curious, you have a very diverse body of work. So today in class, we read some realist stories that are out of the, you know, American tradition of short story writing, right? In Drift and Swerve. And we also read the Little Goat, which is fantastical, but your own spin on it. Your first novel, Safe in Heaven Dead, was kind of a thriller, a literary thriller. So I'm curious, as you move from project to project to project, are you thinking about, well, I actively want to try something new, or is it just come organically? And what is the process? So let's start with, say, the first writing you ever did, that like stories in literary magazines like the Quarterly, and then your first book comes out, which is this literary thriller. How was that evolution from writing like literary short stories that Gordon Lish was publishing to writing something like Safe in Heaven Dead?
And that novel was also straight realism. So I was in the American tradition of male realism that in some ways became, well, I did it. You know, it wasn't that I did so much of it, but I did some of it. And then I was going to try something else. And so work got a little bit weirder after that for a while. But I also think, you know, this quote from David Shields, he talks about the groaning contrivance of the fictional apparatus, which I think is a great line, right? And I think I got a little bit bored with the groaning contrivance of the fictional apparatus and wanted to fuck around with it more. You know, wanted to get into stuff that was a little bit weirder. So my next novel was way more fragmented and way more broken up, much in the way that a lot of Lopez's stuff is, right? Very fragmented. I mean, I think at one point I had like 50 points of view in this novel, and it was all first person points of view, and it didn't work at all. And then I thinned it down and kind of narrowed it down and started with, but it was very, very different. And it was still realistic, but it was fragmented, much in the way that a lot of Rob's work is. And then from there, stuff got weirder in that it became unhinged from reality for me, because it was, I don't remember being conscious of this, but the crazy stuff for Pie and Whiskey was liberating too. To play in it was super fun. And the fancy, and I've been reading writers that were more into that kind of play. And then when Kate and I did this book, this Pie and Whiskey book that Rob's also in, I wrote the recipes for the book. And the recipes I wrote the cocktail recipes, but the cocktail recipes aren't really recipes at all. They're little mini false history lessons, like about George Washington cutting off Thomas Jefferson's hands and stuff like that. It's just ridiculous recipes. And then you make a Manhattan and drink it. You know, so I kept going in this direction that felt really, really cool, different, unhinged. And then I think the nonfiction then grounded me again, you know?
Yeah. But I'm curious as to, okay, so Safe and Heaven Dead starts as, and we talked a little bit about in class, you kill off the main character in the very first sentence. And then you go back and say, how did this person get to this spot? Now, was that a conscious choice? Did you arrive immediately? Was that the starting point, or did you write a bunch of papers?
I mean, that, you know,
and eventually come to that as a starting point? Because we're looking at work in our classes where, you know, we're trying to figure out what it is we're doing, and the writing process is the discovery. So I want us to talk a little bit about how you find your way. So we look at books, we get the book, it's the final form.
Right.
And it feels like, wow, that must have been easy. Look at it. It's all pretty between the two covers. But the work, the arduous years of, just complete exasperation about it, or, we don't talk enough about that and the process, how we get there. So I'm curious, killing off that character in the very first line of Safe and Never Dead, did you get that immediately, or did you come to it after?
So the first page of that book I did get, that was the first page I wrote, which is really weird and really unusual. It never happened to me again. So I wrote this first page, the guy's dead. He calls out to this woman, Carla, wait, I'm not finished. And then, he's, a shoe lands in the lap of an old lady being pushed by her nurse on 2nd Avenue, and sirens start blaring, and that's the end of the first page. This guy's dead, and I'm like, okay, done for the day. And then I had no idea what to do. So I started doing research. I did a lot of research for, a couple months, but a bunch of different stuff, trying to figure stuff out about this woman, Carla, particularly. Didn't know it was going to happen with point of view or anything else. My background, I had a labor background. So I was involved in a lot of labor negotiations and grievances. So I knew there was going to be a labor element because I understood labor.
So we always talk about the right what you know shit. Like, this is how you establish authority. So you knew labor, contract, and negotiation, having been an officer in a union, and now you work as a legislative liaison in the capital of Washington, dealing with politicians. So you write about that because you know it.
Yeah. And because it's fun.
Right.
So I knew the labor stuff, and I interviewed people. I knew I had to get it out of New York too, because my experience was in New York. So I moved it out of New York and moved it into Michigan. And I was interviewing people in Michigan about some of their law and some of their labor problems, and really just trying to be like, I don't know what I'm doing. And when I do research, and I know you might have this experience, I think I'm wasting time. But it's always good. The research almost always comes into play. And I don't mean you should lard your work with research, but it's shocking how often it bears fruit. So I did all this research, for like a month or two after that first page. And then I came back and then I started grinding. So I started writing. I wrote some stuff from him from 9 months ago. I was like, how'd he get to New York? And I was like, what's he doing here? And so I started kind of writing his past 9 months ago. And then I introduced the woman who he was running after across 2nd Avenue. I was like, all right, who's she? And then I started developing her, and then I went forward, and then I rewrote and tore it apart and changed the order, changed point of view, and did all that horrible stuff. So it was just weird that the first page, it was just lucky that the first page turned out like that.
So you do more research for a fiction writer than I think most fiction writers do. And it's interesting, for me, it always feels like overkill or avoiding. So Sam just, he has this extraordinary novel called Miller Kane, A True and Exact History, where this guy is a history teacher, but his histories are the same. Like, it's very invented, like George Washington chopping off Thomas Jefferson's hands with the same axe he used to chop down the cherry tree, right? And he's writing these histories, and you come up with all these people. So to write about George Washington, you read what?
So I read a lot of history. So and this was the novel that was serialized. So it was the same editor. He goes, "Why don't you write a serial novel?" I was like, "Are you kidding?" He goes, "I'll give you 10 grand. I was like, "Okay, let me think about this for a minute." And I was like, "No, I can't do it." And then I called Rob. I was like, I'm thinking about writing this serial novel. I don't know. And I'm going to be doing it in real time. Right. So it's not like I'm going to have it written and then it's going to be released. I had the first, remember how much we had?
Yeah, it was
maybe 20.
Yeah.
So I called Rob and we started talking. I was like, well, I want to do this in a different way. Well, let's work together. I want you to be inside my head. Help me with, normally when we read each other's work, as an editor, you don't give them lines. You're not telling them what to do. You're just trying to help them find their way. But it's like, I want you to get in with me on this. And I had 2 other writers too, doing the same thing. So it was a collaborative work of imagination. It was fucking great to have that experience. And that's what made it really, really cool. But what I was doing on that was I was doing heavy research. And this was American history that I was looking at, because I was interested in distorted American history, our broken narrative, the myths, American myths, and all the weird orthodoxy surrounding our story, right? And how it's changed and how false it is. And this guy's doing stuff. Meanwhile, this guy's also, he goes to mass shootings. The way he supports himself now is he arrives at mass shootings and comforts people and cons them out of their money. So that feels super American to me too. So he's on the road doing this stuff. And then there's this history thing. So the research piece was just reading an enormous amount of American history, which was really fun. So I read like 6 books about the Whitmans, which is why I know so much. And then, got 1 page out of it. But then read,
I want to stop right there. He read 6 books about Narcissa and Mr. I don't know his name.
Marcus
Whitman, 6 books to get 1 page of what turned out to be in the novel. And you did the same thing over and over again.
Buffalo Bill was a good one.
So for Elvis, like Elvis is in the book, right? Because of course, Elvis needs to be in the book. You read a boatload of Elvis biography just to get maybe a paragraph or 2 about Elvis.
But the thing with and this was mostly biography that I was reading. The thing about biography is always life and times. Right, a good biography is going to be contextualized by the times in which the subject lives. So what I'm doing is soaking in American mythology and history. So all the reading was valuable because of the storytelling that's going on around all these American figures. So, but I'm reading primary sources like all of Frederick Douglass's writing. If you read him, stunning. He's a stunning writer. This stuff's coming out in 1850, late 1840s. It's unbelievable. So reading primary sources like that, or reading John Brown stuff, just reading a whole lot of stuff that got me really deep into American history. And so it was more than just getting the information. It was really getting the milieu of our story. And it was cool. And I read a ton for this book, but it was all nonfiction, which was also cool. And I was getting recommendations. Most biographies are bad. I don't know if you've noticed this. They just suck. Because it's always like, oh, here's why. Here's why he's like that. His mom put him in a dress, which was Kenneth Lynn's biography of Hemingway in the late 80s. It was insane. Anyway, there's always this reductive essentialism that goes with the biography that we're going to get to what really is going on with Zora Neale Hurston. Here's what it is. This is why. It's just bullshit. So I was looking for really good. Do you guys know the writer Daniel Orozco? He's a big biography guy. So he just was feeding me biographies. He's like, you got to read about Jerry Lewis. I was like, I don't give a shit about Jerry. He goes, no, you got to read this biography. It was great. He just kept giving them to me. So it was stuff like that. And it was really, really a good experience. So I was doing that all day. I was writing in the morning, and then I was reading biographies all day. It was fantastic. And then every week, I said my deadline was Tuesday. I said, Rob, the pages on Sunday? Toward the end of March, Rob, get pages on Sunday. He'd be like, and it's going to be like 1,000 words. So none of this is working. What? We go through it, and I'm trying to do it on the fly. We had the first 20 installments, so we knew almost half. We knew about almost half. It was 50 installments total. But by the end, I was writing them right up to deadline and handing them in. And we certainly didn't know what was going to happen. So it was really cool.
It's a great experience and interesting.
And now Rob and I are working on it for something else.
You mentioned as an editor, the difference between being an editor and being a collaborator or being your own writer. You were the editor of Willow Springs, which is a really cool literary journal out of Eastern Washington University, for what you do that?
13 years.
13 years. Yeah. One of the things I want to talk about tonight is all of the various hats you've worn in your writerly career. So not only have you bounced around in genre and form, writing fantasy, we looked at The Little Goat today, which was fantastical. Wonderland is all bizarro fantasy stuff with your own spin to it. So as an editor for a literary journal, and then also the editor of an anthology, Pine Whiskey, I'm curious as to how you went about that business. What was that like for you as a longtime writer, now working with writers? What did you want from them? What did you look for in a piece of fiction, nonfiction, or poetry? I know you had your hands in every genre and every piece that went into the magazine. So what's what's it like being an editor of a literary journal? And do you recommend doing such things for all of us?
Yeah, I do. I think it's really cool work and it's hard work. Anybody who's done it, Paul, have you done any of that?
No, I guest edited a couple
Yeah.
of journals, which is just, I just say make it so.
Yeah, right. And Rob has done it. Rob's done it as a fiction editor for a couple different places and also as a book editor. But it's hard, It's
More than one.
Yeah, it's just hard work. It's never ending. You finish the issue and that's the next one. And it's hard, but it's also really, really cool. So you're getting all this work and, it's also devastating. And so my students were my staff and I was able to pay the top 3, which is also fantastic. And because of that, they could commit to a level and they also ended up getting jobs in the business because they had this incredible experience. But this was for students who wanted to be editors. And there's a real person who wants to do that job. It's not for everybody. But what's cool about it for my students, and the reason I always wanted more students involved just reading, is when you look at the what comes into a magazine, it's devastating. So I would publish about 6 pieces of fiction a year. Of the 6, I'd solicit 2 of them. So I'd get something from Rob, right? Get something from somebody else whose work I admired. So I got 2. Now I got 4 pieces left that I'm going to run. We get 4,000 submissions a year. So fiction.
4 out of 4,000.
I'm picking 1 out of 1,000. What are we doing? Why are we doing this? It's impossible, right? It's 0.1% of the material. Poetry is easier. Nonfiction is much easier. But fiction's a bitch. And so we're publishing almost none of it. There's a great, I can't remember how this joke came about. It was about a magazine that had gotten to a place where they were taking absolutely nothing. They were publishing nothing at this point. 0 acceptance rate. It was the most exclusive mag. It's like Harvard, right? Anyway, so what was great for students was go come see this because it's devastating. You're not going to believe it. You're going to see that, you got a 1 in 1,000 chance. And this is at Willow Springs. What do you think it is at Paris Review? 1 in 50,000? How about the New Yorker? How about, it's going to be a little easier at Plowshares. How about Georgia? How about Southern? Tin House, when they were still in business. I mean, it's impossible. But here was the great thing. So go in and start reading. You got to read, your job is you got to read 100 stories in the next 3 weeks. And read. And the thing is, most of it sucks. And that's fantastic. So you're like, okay, wait a minute. I was coming into this knowing how hard this was going to be, that my odds were impossible. But now, as a reader, I realized, wait a minute, my stuff is okay, maybe. Maybe I'm all right. Maybe my work is at a level where maybe I'm not quite ready yet, but I'm maybe in the top 10% here or something. You start to get a feeling for what's happening. You also see what's happening in the zeitgeist. So you're seeing weird stuff about water skiing coming up in every story. Like, why is everyone writing about water skiing? Why is this happening in all the poems? Which is also really interesting and cool, this weird phenomenon. But it's super encouraging to see kind of what's happening in your world, because these are your peers, right? These are living writers who are submitting stuff. You're seeing what they're writing. You're seeing the breadth of it, which is really cool. You're seeing how inventive it is. You're seeing when it doesn't work. And then when you take the piece, working with the writer on it is the greatest part of the whole thing. I love it. And my attitude as an editor was always, hey, I edit. I'm going to be an editor. But in order for me to edit, I need to establish our relationship, which is that you're, as the writer, are in control of the whole process. So I'm never, I'm going to give you edits with the understanding that you're going to reject them. And in order for me to be able to do a good job, I have to know that you will reject my edits. And so that takes a little while to kind of figure out that conversation and what the power dynamic is in the relationship, which is really critical. And we came up at a time when Gordon Lish had been rewriting Carver's stories and doing a bunch of really, really weird shit. And he did some of it to me, some of that really, really weird shit. And I knew that there was that an editor could actually play a really dangerous role in a writer's life. Have you seen the exchange between Lish and Carver? What was that? What was the book?
What we talked about when we talked about.
Yeah, what we talked about. Carver had been reading it all over Syracuse. All of his friends, Wolf had seen it, Ford had seen it, all of his friends had seen it, had heard him read the stories. He gets the galleys for the book. All the stories are different. He goes, I can't. He's right. You see these letters. You can get these on NewYorker.com, and you can see Lish's markup too of what we talk about. His markup is fantastic. It's really, really good, but it's a radically different story. So Carver's begging, please don't release this like this. Please don't. You're seeing a writer that's being taken apart, right? It's like, oh, when you read the markup of what we talk about, those last lines of that story that are so brilliant, they're all Lish's. Lish wrote them. So how do you feel about your great story that you didn't write? It's like, what? So it was a nightmare. So needless to say, Carver's next book was not with Knopf. It was not with Lish. And it was Cathedral, and there were larger stories. But I want to tell you something. When his Collected came out, he only restored 4 of those stories. He left everything else the way Lish did it because they were good. But the problem was the relationship. So I knew that. And I had my own experience with Lish. Lish did a lot of teasing, and I'd send it to him because I really, really love this. Send me something else. And I'd send it, and he'd take the first 6 pages, cut everything except 5 words. And be like, "Now follow my lead." And I'd be like, and I don't mind a cut, but I was like, I had no idea. And I would try, really, really try. And I'd send it back. He goes, what, we're just jerking off here. I was like, okay. It sucked, it was really, really a nightmare. Anyway, so I was really cognizant of that as an editor, that I didn't want to step on writers' toes in any way, but at the same time, I wanted the collaborative relationship with them. So I think I was able to do that. And the hardest thing about being an editor is to approach the work on its own terms, which is really hard to do. So you can't edit the work the way you write. You can't say, I would do this line like this. That's not your job. Your job is to somehow hear the work. So you're listening to this song, and you got to do the work within the confines and the rules of this song and make it work. And that's a really cool experience, really different than being a writer. And as such, it's a relief. You're still living in the world of letters, but you get a break, but you get to collaborate. We don't do that. You play in a band, and Paul, you know about that. You get to collaborate. We don't get to collaborate very often. So when you do, it's really fun. And that's why Rob and I do a lot of collaboration, because of the relief of it. Anyway, the editing experience was really, really cool. I loved it. But it was also a grinding nightmare. It was never ending. So I was really happy also when it ended, because I was like, I can't keep doing this. And I feel like I didn't write as much as a result.
So how do you find that balance between being a writer, but also doing all the other stuff you do, teaching, editing, running a reading? You would put together these readings that would have 300 people, and you and Kate, Sam's wife is a master pie maker. She's one of the great people in the country, and has written books on pie, and written her most recent book, the Book of Difficult Fruit, gets into all fruit stuff, which is extraordinary.
It's cool essays.
So how do you balance, okay, where does my work fit in to the scope of living a literary life? And then, where's the balance come from?
Yeah, and to me, I think I'm going to say it's not that I live it, but I'm going to say, but I think that when I'm most successful is when I write first. And I think this is true for many, many writers. And it's not just because we're tired at the end of the day, which we are, because we're old, but it's also that I want to write first, because if I write first, I know it'll get done. But I'm also freshest when I'm writing first. I think my mind's best. I'm closest to dreams, whatever it is.
In the day.
Right? I want to write before I interact with people. I want to write before I do any other job. And if I'm not writing well, I'll do any job first. Right? If the writing's not going well, if I'm having a problem with the writing, this is when I'll clean. I'm going to organize pencils. I'm going to figure out I need to get rid of a whole lot of files in my computer, just do idiotic shit to not work. But when I'm writing well, what I know I should do is write first. And I think if you write first, it takes care of it. And you don't have to write, you can work for 2 hours and it's fine. I mean, for me, 2 hours is kind of what I need. Just two to four for me is good. So I think making it the highest priority for me is how I do it. But there's times when it doesn't go as well. I say also, keep a schedule. Well, yeah, you keep a schedule, make your writing schedule, keep it, make the appointment, show up, except when you don't, One more thing about the literary magazines, you can be a reader right now for New England Review. You can probably be a reader for Paris in town. You can be a reader for a whole bunch of places,
Including our own Southampton.
including Southampton. Doing that work is really good for you in a whole lot of ways. It puts you in touch with other writers who are reading for this magazine, puts you in touch with that literary community, and it lets you see what's going on out in the world as you're interacting as a writer and a reader. And it might lead you to other things. And if you find out you like it and you're good at it, it might lead you to work in that field. Now you won't make any money. You'll make good money. You can make a living now. And it's cool. So if you're thinking about, I need something to help me in my writing, because you have school right now and you get stimulated to that, then school ends. Then what are you going to do? And having that community in the magazine could be really good, and you all can do it. I mean, you're in a place where you can do it if you stay in New York, but there's a bunch of other places where you can too.
Yeah. We still have a few more minutes. Are there any questions from our studio audience? Nicole, I will Phil Donahue.
Do this.
Phil Donahue.
I was just wondering, because you've made a switch from fiction to nonfiction, what are your intentions? Like, when do they change? Have they changed now, just in writing in general?
Do you mean, what's my intention as a writer?
Well, what is your intention now writing in nonfiction versus what it was writing in fiction?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the thing that's cool about nonfiction, what part of the liberation is, like, I don't have to make as much shit up. You know, like, I'm going to use stuff that I'm going to try to find something that happened and then try to do something with it, handle it. But you're doing in fiction all the time anyway, too. I remember I found like $40 in a bar when I was 21 on the floor. It was unbelievable, right? It was like, oh my God, it was Sunday. I was in a bar on a Sunday by myself. It was fantastic. And I'm sitting there, I was just going to have a hamburger, smoke a couple of cigarettes, have a drink, and go back to study. And I found this money. It was one of the best days of my life. So I was like, I got to write about this stupid money. And what I really wanted to capture was the quality of the light coming into that room on an afternoon, on a Sunday afternoon, shortly before Easter, after spring's coming, and I'm 21 years old, and it's a mostly empty bar, and I'm smoking, having a couple of drinks, and I find this money. And it's just like, it was just this beautiful moment that I just wanted to capture that moment. Really, it's somewhat different than fiction, but it's also kind of like fiction. You know, so and I think you mine your life in fiction too. Of course we do, right? We use our life all the time. But in nonfiction, I can kind of, I don't know, the reporting piece of it feels like a relief in a way. The research feels like a relief sometimes. But I also think they do similar things. I don't really know. Well, but I also don't know what to do. So when Rob did his, the book that became Put of Nowhere, those were long essays. Right. We were talking about those, and he was knocking them out once a month, 5,000 words, bang, bang. And we're doing the edits on them, going back. Here comes another one. Here comes another one. Really cool. And it took shape fast. Right. It became clear this is the book real fast. That's not happened for me with nonfiction. I'm doing these little things. So I hope it does. But I think trying different stuff is cool. And what Rob and I are trying to do right now is screenplay, which is also something we don't know anything about, which is cool. I also think, just going back to the part, so Rob and I have been friends for a long time, and it's been really an important relationship personally and artistically. And what I mean by that is, what I say to my students is, the most important thing that you're going to get out of this experience is your peers. And what I mean is, who are going to be your people in 10 years? Who's going to be your reader in 20 years from now? Because my reader from 20 years ago is here, and 25 years ago, and most important reader for me, and it found that person at school, cultivated that relationship, and it's just critical. And you go through all this bullshit heartache. One thing that Rob and I have done that's been really lucky is we've gone on the road together a lot. We've had a lot of books come out at the same time. There's a lot of crying on the road. But why don't they love me more? Nobody loves me as much as they love other people. Aren't I lovable? So if you're with somebody else and you're starting to do that stuff, it doesn't work. So it's really a relief to have somebody else on the road, but also a relief to see that you're all going through this idiot, because writers are huge babies, right? And it's a great thing to have somebody else doing the idiotic, bad, selfish baby stuff. And also just to be able to call and say, I need help, man. Can you look at this? Rob and I had a crazy experience. This is, I don't know even when this was, maybe 10 years ago. Rob sent me a story for an edit, and I loved it. I loved this story. And I was like, I don't think this is finished. And I started writing on it. And I added like 5 pages. I said it, which is, again, a cardinal sin for an editor. And again, being aware of Lish and all that stuff, you never, ever add, you're not adding lines to people's stuff if you're reading it. I just started writing all over it. And he fortunately.
So let me pick this up. This is fun, right? So I started a piece, and I think it's idiotic, right? It's a second person imperative. I write in second person, but it just happened. And
it's called How to Direct a Motion Picture.
Motion picture. So the first line is give the actor something to do, have them smoke a cigarette or bounce a ball. And that's it, right? And it goes from there. I quickly wrote 4 or 5 pages. I set it aside. A bunch of years go by. The really cool lit journal out of New Mexico State, Puerto del Sol, solicits me. And they say, we're doing an issue about film. And so I looked at it. I hadn't thought of it in years. I just wrote a little bit more. I sent it to Sam. And I said, Sam, look at this. Is this as stupid as I think it is? He writes back, maybe a day or 2 later. I'm sorry, is the first line. I'm sorry. He goes, I love the voice so much, I wrote 5 more pages. And I look at it, and I love what Sam did. And so I trim it. I nip and tuck and edit, and I wrote more. I sent it to him. He did the same. He sent it back to me. I finished it. We gave it to Puerto del Sol. And I said, I put the same thing on the body line, so it's both of our names. And what's really funny is a bunch of years later, the writer Matt Bell, who teaches now at Arizona State University, has a really good craft book called Refuse to Be Done about writing novels. Generally, I don't recommend craft books. I think reading novels is the best way to learn how to write novels, but you might want to check this one out, in particular, the stuff we talked about today. And all of us writing novels. Matt writes this investigative journalist piece about that story. And he goes, this line was Lopez, this line was Ligon, and he got every single one right. He nailed every single one, which Sam thought he was pissed because he was trying to do the voice. I was test. But Matt got everything right in this essay. And it was a long essay, a 1,000-word essay about the story. All which is to say that none of that would have happened in the summer of 1996. I am going to register. I got into grad school, the new school. We're part of the very first class of the new school, the MFA program. And I am, this is way before computers and cars. So I'm standing on a line, a queue for me. It's a queue, right? I'm standing on it physically. Sam is right behind me. We start talking. Oh, who are you taking? Who are you going to? We're going to take Amy Hempel. And so Amy Hempel was our teacher in the fall of 1996. And here we are, 27 years later. We're still in conversation. We're still working. We're still sharing work. He's my main guy. And so much of what I have written has passed his eyes, what Sam's written has passed mine. And unless we had that connection back in grad school, Sam, by then too, he was already an associate professor at a community college on Long Island. He was only getting an MFA to have a terminal degree so he can get a raise
to get promoted.
So you can get a promotion at work and get more money. He wasn't really, whereas me, I never even saw another writer at that point. I didn't know what another writer did. So we struck up that relationship, and it's we've been around this country together, giving craft talks and readings. We visited maybe, and of course, I think we've done 6 tours. We probably visited maybe 12, 15, 20 schools all around the country, reading and giving craft talks about fiction and nonfiction. And it all started where you guys are now. So keep up with each other is the lesson.
And now Rob will feel comfortable with being like, why don't you say artisanal mayonnaise maker there? I'm like, yes. And I'll add that line. Where's it?
We all write each other's shit. So much of my stuff, I'll get out of Sam's line. He wrote these 2 lines for me. Right? And so that's super fun. Because what Sam was saying earlier, so much of what we do is just by ourselves. You feel like you're shouting into the void all the time. And so just yesterday, Sam got an email from a fencing coach in Denison University saying, I read your essay and it was great. And that's the reward. You reach the 1 reader. And yeah, I did it. I got the 1 guy, the fencing guy. It's great. Okay, any other questions? Miles. Are these actual months? That's a great encouragement. You don't get it.
I guess it's kind of a deep question, but I just wanted to ask you about like the quarterly and, the writers that were, in the quarterly. And I guess just like, Gordon Lich's legacy. And it just seems like, all the time, writers that I know, friends and stuff, people bring them up and, I just wanted to, get your thoughts on that.
I mean, he was a great editor, he really, even though he did all these weird things, in the case of Carver, but it went too far and it became crazy and I got this forest story. But in the story that he ran of mine in the quarterly, I got galleys from him and it was, this is my first publication. And to me it was, and then I was like, okay, it's good. I'm good. I'm in. I got in the club. Now I can do whatever I want because anything I read, the next one's going to be, the New Yorker, certainly, or something like that. Which of course didn't happen, so the galleys, he didn't do a lot of line edits on this thing, but he'd give a note. He gave a note at the top of 1 page. He goes, I don't like the word thighs. So it's okay. So it's like, I cut the word thighs. And then on 1 page, he goes, I just want you to cut 3 words from this page. So I was like, really? All right, so I lived through it, and I'm going through it. I'm looking at what are the 3? There wasn't a thigh that I could cut. So I was like looking and going through it. I'm like, okay. So I start getting into it, and I ended up cutting like 95 words and adding 92. I was like, I'm going to shove you. I'm going to give you a net cut of 3 words. I'm going to add a bunch of words. And of course, it's the best page in the story. Now look at that page. Like this is the page where I'm like, oh, this is the page that got my attention. And I feel like he taught me that by doing that weird ass thing that he did. And I feel like he was a good teacher that way. And our teacher, and it's Amy teaches, right? So that was the most significant teacher in my life. And she had a huge impact on me. And I remember so much of what she said, and my students now have it. A lot of it came from Lish. What she says to you, she got from Lish. So his impact on letters is huge. And you look at the writers he edited, it's unbelievable. A lot of great books. But, it was also really weird. I mean, he had that, the class he had on the Upper East Side, you had to be invited and you couldn't go to the bathroom and, went for 8 hours. Sometimes a bunch of weird stuff that went, I don't mean weird, like culty sexual weird. I just mean, intense. No, of course there was that, but, it's just kind of, and so, he invited me down to that class. I was living in New Hampshire and I was like, oh man, I should go. You can come. He goes, we'll waive the tuition. I want to say it in a British accent. I only talked to him once, but he has kind of one of those weird affected Upper East Side British accents. You know what I mean? That weird, like, oh, for pity's sake. That's exactly what he said to me. And I was like, what is that accent? Oh, for pity's sake. Anyway, I was like, well, I have to go do that. I have to go be in the salon, right? And I'm living in New Hampshire, like 25. I have to take the train down. And then I started hearing these stories. I started getting letters about what I had to do to prepare for it. And I was like, I don't think I can do this. And I was like, now I had to figure out how to get out of it because I thought I'm going to be somehow, I thought I was going to be somehow kind of ruined by it. So I got out of it. But I was also like, I really want to do this. I really want to do this. And, I think Mark Richard's book came out at that time, or I think it was about to come out. Mark Richard had been in the quarterly, and then Lish was like, let's make this short. Fishboy was a short, right?
Yeah.
And then Lish was like, let's make this into, and I was like, maybe that's going to happen to me. You know, so I was really conflicted about doing it. And finally I became too afraid to do it. And I don't regret that. I think it was a good, because I was after we'd gone through the stuff where he was like doing stuff with me that I was like, I don't know what you're doing, and that it's freaking me out. So I ultimately didn't do it, but my experience was still really cool.
You get out of it, get out of it.
And I don't think he had a negative impact on Amy the way he did on Carver. And I don't know if Amy would say it was negative for Carver.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a different conversation.
You should ask her.
She brings them up. Like. I think every class will like it. Yeah.
Well, she's quoting him, right? She's saying render the objects.
Yeah, the office,
Yeah. I mean, we quote him because of her too. I mean, I'm sure Rob's quoting him to you. So he's a major teacher.
I'll just like it.
Yeah. Rob's got the salon in Brooklyn.
Yeah. And you can't go to that.
There was a piece in the Times today. Did you see this piece about the dinners where you have to take off your clothes to have dinner? It was insane.
No.
Did you see this? Yeah.
Okay.
I was like, why? What is it?
We'll circle back to that. But, any other questions? Mia. Maya, you didn't get lovely for him. You got
I was wondering how your experience as an editor has affected your editing of your own work, whether you find it's really helpful or whether you still have blind spots when it comes to your own work and then rely on other people's editorial opinions.
Yeah, I do think you're always have blind spot. I do have blind spot. I had a really good editor. So Rob's my main editor and my wife. And a friend of mine named Jess. These are my main editors. And it's shocking to me every time that I think I'll have something just right. And it's shocking what is there. They're like, what was I thinking with this line that I thought was so good? And they're like, look at this. And so now I have blind spots. And that's why you need those editors so much. It's always shocking to me when people, and I think it's good to resist. I mean, I don't mean you should ever take edits just because the editor gave them to you. I think it's really important to know how to say no to an editor. We all need to do that. But it's also good to know how to take edits. And I'm interested in making the work better. Rob, do you remember that thing in Other Voices?
Yes, this is.
So I wrote this story.
I think I tell it better.
Okay.
Okay, so Sandy's little story is a killer story. And no. Maybe this is a different story. I'm gonna tell my story, but you might have to tell your story. Okay. So my story is this. Sam gives me this piece. It's killer. All the way great through the piece. The last paragraph.
It's the last line.
It's the last two lines. Okay. The last two lines are Raymond Carver, what we talked about when we talked about the word.
Exactly.
And I go, Sam, you're doing and he goes, oh no, it's a lot like Carver. I go, no, it's not a lot like Carver. It is Carver. Go to the shelf right now, open it up. He opens it up. He's horrified. He said, holy shit. I rewrote 2 Carver sentences at the end of my story.
So it was a great ending. Later, I found out Gordon Lish really wrote those lines. But
so I mean, that's the thing. You need the eye. Of course, Sam knows that. He knows that work backwards and forwards, but somehow or another,
I thought I wrote it.
he wrote it. And it's not his work.
And it sucked. And so I frantically called the editor and I was like, hey, we got to change the ending of the story. And they're like, why? Like, because they're Carver's lines. We got to rewrite it. But I wouldn't have ever seen it if Rob hadn't read it.
Yeah.
Really embarrassing.
So even if you are a really good and ruthless editor of your own work, you need somebody else to have a look at it, because sometimes you just blind to certain things, and you know.
But it doesn't mean you always listen.
Exactly.
And your people are going to be wrong about certain things. There's stuff you're going to hold on to that they're just wrong about. You know. So it's a dilemma. And in non-fiction, I'm getting into some territory where I'm starting to write stuff that's kind of a little bit provocative, meaning people are going to get pissed off by it. And so my wife's like, do you really want to say this? And I'm like, I think. Like, well, people are going to come after you if you say this. I'm like, well,
Did you get pushback from the gun piece we read?
Yeah, so I mean, the gun piece got picked up in a bunch of places all over the country, which hadn't happened before. So it was in Cleveland, it was in Salt Lake, it was in Pittsburgh, it was in Florida, it was in
And
Georgia.
what publication is it?
It was weeklies. So somehow it got picked up by weeklies, and so I started getting this weird shit. I was getting Google alerts. It was my name, not that I put my name in as Google alert, but I was getting Google alerts like, here's a gun newsletter in Texas that you're mentioned in. And I open it up and it's about, this asshole New York Jew who's writing about guns and obviously doesn't know anything about guns. And I'm like, and so stuff like that started happening. There's wild debate so look at this stuff, and I can't remember what, I think it was Tampa. There's this huge debate about, is he going to get a gun or is he going to stay a complete pussy? This guy might change. I think this guy's going to change. I think he's on his way to getting his gun. I think he's going to tell us why he's getting a gun. I think that's what it's going to be. Other people think, no, he's not. He's a New York Jew. I mean, it's just like, it was insane. So that was the first time that I was like, that felt a little bit dangerous because people were talking about me being a problem on the gun front. And I didn't anticipate that. And I was talking about, in the West, I don't know if you guys, we have a lot of we have people walking around in army costumes with assault weapons and they're patrolling. So when shit went down with after George Floyd, and everything was going on in the cities, so we've got guys walking around, they're patrolling to make sure the city stays safe, right? And like, it was terrifying to me. And so I'm writing about those guys. And that's what Kate was like, those are the guys that are gonna come kill you. And I was like, well, and then oddly, it didn't occur to me. And then once she said it, I was like, that's right. Maybe I shouldn't write
It's great for your career.
I know. So, but that stuff, that stuff was weird. But then the stuff now is more politically charged and dangerous. So I'm trying to figure out how to do it in a way that doesn't feel like, I don't want it to feel mean, exactly. I don't really want it to feel mean at all. I want it to be funnier than it is mean. And it's not really mean. And it's like, I know it'd be a bag, sorry. So I'm just trying to write this piece about goodness.
What subject matter?
Goodness. I'm talking about, I'm imagining a goodness school where we learn how to be good. And I'm talking about all the things we're going to do to be good. Right. And I start talking about training at work. You guys will get training at your jobs. It's insane. But start with that and then get it, and then it goes, then the training becomes weirder and weirder and weirder. So, but there's stuff, so when I gave it to Kate, she's like, you can't say this. You cannot say this. I was like, what? And then I looked at it, and she said, do you know what you're saying? I'm like, what am I saying? She told me, I said, okay, cut that line. So, but it's political. It's the stuff of, you're going to get slammed on Twitter if you write this. And the part of me is like, okay, I don't want to do it for that reason either. Like, okay, how do I find the line here to go into this political area and talk? Because the problem we're having right now as writers is speech and orthodoxy, right? And I know you're feeling the fear that you better not cross the line. You better not say the wrong word. You better not say the wrong thing. You're afraid of appropriation. You're afraid of all kinds of stuff when that stuff started happening, I used to tell my students, oh, don't worry about it. And that was really disingenuous of me and didn't help them. And I was like, no, you worry about it. I understand why we're all worried about it. So let's talk about it. What does it mean? What can we do? What can't we do? How do we exist as writers and people who are trying to challenge and are dealing in language, right? When we've got our own allies telling us, you better not say that. You better never say that one, or this one, or this one. Better not say that one. You can't say this one. She can't say that one. And the places that we thought were the sort of bulwarks of speech are now saying speech is dangerous. So you're like, oh shit. That's why we love it, right? Of course it's dangerous. But you're telling me I can't talk? And so it's a dilemma, right? And figuring out and that doesn't mean we should be assholes, right? But it's really hard to figure out what are we allowed to say? And once we're in that position, what does it do to us as writers? If we're constantly wondering what am I allowed to say, it's tough. But it's real too. So my issue, and what I said was the first rule of goodness school is don't be an asshole. That's the main rule. Just don't be an asshole. And then I give a whole bunch of examples.
And Kate's like, this is kind of asshole, you know, right? Okay, let's cut that one. Beat a little bit, too much of an asshole there. I get rid of it.
All right, we have time for one more question. if anybody has.
I don't wanna.
Does anybody else wanna?
Okay, should I?
Okay, but maybe, do it next.
Do it. So, I definitely give myself sometimes because I say this thing to myself where it's like, if I'm gonna be a writer, I better do it all the time because it's how, it's being a writer. And then when I'm not writing, I feel really guilty, I feel like I shouldn't even be sleeping anymore, I should just be writing, and doing speed. Right.
Don't really do the speed up.
Yeah. And I don't know, I mean, how do you go easy on yourself?
But I don't think you do.
Yeah,
But I mean, I think what you got is it. That's right. That's what it is.
yeah,
Right? I mean, it's like if you're not writing, you're not doing your job. So there's gonna be times when you're not writing, so you're gonna feel bad.
yeah.
That's how you make yourself do it, I think.
Like, is it okay to like hang out with friends sometimes?
Yeah, but they come second,
Yeah,
you know? I mean, I think the thing, what I say to students is like, if you can make the schedule, it's people like, what you need to do, I'm not gonna say this, I saw this famous writer. This person was talking about, and they're really old at this point, like, so people asking questions, a group like this, it's a big group, it's at Port Townsend. So what should young writers do? Said, use a black pen, write in black ink. You should read the entire encyclopedia. You should speak more than one language. And it's not kidding, right? And I'm getting all these rules, crazy shit, right? And so you'll hear writers like, look, you need to write, if you're a writer, you need to write 6 days a week. You can take one day off, but you need to write 6 days a week. So you get all these rules, it's all bullshit, right? But you need your own rules. So you make your own rules and you keep your own appointments. So I've got a buddy who writes 2 days a week. And that's what he does. He shows up on those 2 days. And one of them he works for about 3 hours, and one of them maybe he works for 6. That's it. That's what he can do. That's how much time he has. But he does it. He always shows up. He's published 3 books that he's written in the last probably 6 years.
Is it Sean?
Yeah. And that's what he can do. He shows up. So whatever it takes for you, and that's why I say make the schedule. Make a schedule you can keep. And then if you don't keep it, it's still really bad. Feels horrible if you don't keep your schedule.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how you do it otherwise. The job sucks too much. You got to feel bad about not doing it, because then the only way you feel okay is you did your job. Then you feel okay. But you don't have to work 6 days a week, and you don't have 2,000.
You don't have to write every day. You could write when the spirit moves you, but just do the things that's going to move you to the desk. And for me, that's always been reading. Like when I'm reading, or I'm listening to music, or I'm watching a really good television series because they don't make movies anymore. It moves me to the desk. So you know what? I want to make something. I'm looking at you make something, and now I want to make something.
Yeah.
So
And that's why it's also good to read those literary magazines and to have your friends, because it's like if she can do it, you can do it. She got that pub, you can get that pub. I mean, being around people who are successful, I think, is also really helpful. You see, they're doing it, they're making it happen. And being around the failure, I mean, you're always failing too, right? Being around the failure, living with the failure is also, and the failure is constant in what we do.
like the rejection.
Yeah, everything.
Yeah.
It's all failure nonstop.
Yeah.
Kind of, you know what I mean? I mean, Faulkner talks about that, and you don't say this to your parents, because they don't get it. But the idea is, you're not going to be able to do it as well as you should be able to. This is Faulkner saying, you can't get it, and you have to try to get it. You're going to fail, but you got to keep trying for perfection, even though perfection is impossible. But you got to try. You try, you're going to fail. I mean, what's the back of
that's
this?
the back. Yeah.
Right? Ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better. Fail and fail better. You keep trying. But the failure, it's just part of what we live with. And so yes, the rejection is part of that. But it's also just like you have all these shitty days. You write something you thought was good, it's not any good. Rob tells you it's no good.
Yeah.
And I've done that with a lot of people. And the thing of it is, though, there was probably out of that no good piece you wrote, it's probably one or two really good sentences or turns of phrase that you cannibalize, and then you're off to the races. So,
Or you'll think a piece is no good today and then tomorrow in the back of let's do something with this.
Yeah.
It's good again.
Yeah.
And that's a nightmare too. Vacillating between the inflated ego and the pathetic loser.
and I think ending on pathetic loser. So let's all thank Sam for joining us.